Так, recording progress. Thanks everyone for having me here. And I will tell you about selected puzzles in Ishkashimi negation. The puzzles is not just because it's a theoretical topic or something like this. It is because these are really small pieces of the puzzle which will eventually come together and form a greater, bigger picture as a whole. But for now, these are just separate small topics here. Here's the overview of the topics. So we have the sentential negative markers nist and na, right? So you might remember the competition between ma and na in Shugni, and it's basically a similar pattern of competing negative markers. We have negation and preverbs, which will be very interesting to people who do research on Iranian studies on diachronic linguistics. And the negative particle noi, which kind of continues the story that my colleagues have told about a similar thing in Shugni. So let's start. Ishkashimi has different negative markers depending on the tense. And not only Ishkashimi, but also Sanglishi, for example, really closely related language. In the past tense, there is a marker nist, right, which is not a negative copula, but rather a proper sentential negation marker. In all other tenses, non-past, perfect, pluperfect, the marker na is used as we are used to. So let's look at the contrast between 1 and 2. Forest au nist tucht, right? Yesterday he did not go away. So you see the verb go away, tucht, right? Yeah. Let's switch our audio. And instead of na, we have nist popping up. Meanwhile, with go away, everything is fine. It has the past marking here. And I've checked it myself. You cannot combine the tucht with na, right? So like it's totally incompatible. Meanwhile, in other tenses, in the present tense, in the perfect tense, also natatsu, au porus natuhduk, you see the normal negative morpheme na. So here's the pluperfect example. So nist and na show several important differences. First, nist and the verb can be separated by inflectional clitics, by imperfective and by imperfective particle s. Meanwhile, na cannot. So we can treat na as a kind of bound morpheme. Meanwhile, nist is a clitic, that precedes the verb. So I haven't read that book. Azi makitop nistem beloved, right? It's an example from Pakhalina, from the grammar, and you see the m being between the nist and beloved, something you don't really see in Shugni, right? So we get a personal clitic being between the negative morpheme and the verb, negative clitic and the verb. In the seventh is basically the same, but you have the imperfective clitic, the habitual clitic is, right, which intervenes between the negative past and the verb, the verbal stem. You have nestesohat, right? So in the 8, you have basically the 6, but homemade 6, the example that I have collected by myself. I did not come. It's nistem ohat, right? You have the m intervening between the preverb and between the clitic and the verb. Meanwhile, if you look at the 9th, you don't see the same pattern occurring with na, right? If you look into the positions of respective morphemes, right, you see that normally you would say something like na oradukam, right, and not nama oraduk. So the personal clitic may not intervene between the negation and the verbal root, right? That is very basic, clear, and yeah. Both nist and na show properties of sentential negation. So, for example, they can well license NPIs, negative polarity items, negative concord items. As you see here, ichkui is ichkum, to be precise, is a negative concord item. It is it may appear only in the context of like proper sentential negation. And you can see it co-occurring both with na and with nist, right? As you see here. And so basically there is a resemblance between the negative past mark and the negative copula, right? You're familiar with the negative copula in Shugni, which is nist. And respectively, the negative copula in Ishkashimi is also nist, as you see in the 12th. I'm not a Kyrgyz, an example from Pakhalin as well. Azim, Kyrgyz, nist. So yeah, two questions arise. Can one build a link between these two contexts? And if one can, why does it only appear in the past tense? And these questions are not as far removed from reality as one might think. So let's go to the nist and nist. So my working assumption for now is that the past nist is somehow grammaticalized from the negative copula nist, that there in the previous stage of Ishkashimi, right, there was a link between these two guys. Now maybe the link is lost, maybe we can see it, I don't know. This process is described in the typological literature. It is known as negative existential cycle, or alternatively Croft cycle, because it was introduced by Croft, 1991. It was explored in detail in a big volume by Luba Veselinova in 2022. Now it's different from Jespersen cycle. So yeah. So basically, let me explain. The Croft cycle is a notion where we compare the negation in copula to negation in lexical verbs, right? In the first stage of a cycle, the negative negation in the copula is the same as in like proper sentential negation. Then we have a portmanteau of negation with the copula, right? Forming its own negative copula. It is referred to as stage 2 of stage B of the negative existential cycle. And then it all comes together where the sentential negation gets replaced by the copula negation. We have such cases, yes, in Hindi, where like we get nahin as a fusion of negation and the copula, right? And with regards to Ishkashimi, we have a transitory stage B to C. Why? Because we still maintain the proper negative na, right? But we see the nist creeping into the domain of sentential negation, right? So the stage B is where you have the negative copula and the verbal negation clearly set apart, and stage C is where they all come together, and we have a transitory stage where in some contexts, right, you can see the nist, but in some context you can see the na. And in terms of diachronym, it's not clear, right? I've like read some references and I'm trying to think a bit by myself. So it's not clear whether nist is a native form or is it a loan word from Tajik, right? So on one hand, the loan words from Tajik to Ishkashimi or from Dari to Ishkashimi regularly show the sound change from from this kind of majhul to the this vowel like there is a lot of such words. But on the other hand, the form nist can be equally well derived from Proto-Iranian na-asti, right? From a combination of like sentential Proto-Iranian negation and the form of copula form asti. So it's basically not clear. The copula nist is typically close final, right? I have looked at the corpus of Yaroslava Bertelova, and in all of occurrences, nist was close final. However, with the right information structure, with focalization going on, it is possible to have the order S-NEC O as a nist doneshju. So, for example, if a person tells you you're a student, and you know I'm not a student, as a nist doneshju, the close initial nist is unavailable. Nistau student, right? But you still see that nist is a independent phonological word. That's it. For the verbal nist, the restrictions are different. It can be only strictly preverbal, right? It can only occur to the left of the verb. It can be separated from the verb by just like several clitics, which we have seen already. The possible opposition is never allowed. Au orat nist. Yes, that's totally out of the question. And the next difference, visible difference, I mean, is a phonetic one. So the copular negation is pronounced, always pronounced with a final t, right? In many contexts. Meanwhile, the verbal negation may be pronounced as ns or even as n before sibilants. All right, before s and sh. In Sanglichi, this process has of like phonetic bleaching has gone even further, and like for example, Yusuf Bekov basically denotes ns as n in half of the cases. And it can sound as ns even before vowels, right? I mean, even before contexts which do not trigger some kind of assimilation. So, for example, I have a recording of Nesohat, he didn't come. Let me briefly find it. And for me, it just sounds like nis and not nist. Yagon kas Nesohat, Dani. For me, it's nis. But yeah, maybe it's not very apparent.
You can see it very clearly using prat or something.
Yeah, let's keep our comments to the end of the section, please. So yeah, there is one problem with trying to unite these two contexts, right? It is not clear why the copular negation is permitted in the past tense but not in the others, right? So we can just ask a question: why is it? What is so special about the past tense that we see this nist? A possible suggestion that the past tense has nominal properties, right? That is why it's compatible with the negative copula, right? So you have the copula, like is not, and it is natural to assume that the past tense is some kind of either a gerund or a participle, past participle, something that you see in like English. He was not, he has not done, right? Done is actually a bit of a nominal there. So take a verb tatsuk to go away, right? If the past form tucht was translated as going away or like gone away, translation that would be my going away is not. So yes, basically it is very natural to reduce the this puzzle to past tense having some nominal properties. And this pattern is attested like widely. Which I have seen is like I have worked a bit on Tamil, right? It's found in Finno-Ugric languages, Tungusic languages, and Avar, Dagestani languages. In the past tense, there in Tamil, there is a non-finite form of the verb combined with a negative copula. Let's look at this example briefly. Nan parazuku pora pogale. I did not usually go to the movies, right? And what you see here is the infinitive form of the verb poga, to go, and the le, which is a negative copula. And in the affirmative, in the positive sentence, you have a proper past tense, but when we add the negative copula, we have the infinitive of the verb. And there is indeed diachronic support for this kind of analysis in Ishkashimi, because as you know, all past forms of modern Iranian languages are derived from the verbal nouns ending in ta. See many references. But this idea doesn't really work. So this idea raises many questions, unfortunately. So the main one is that it overgeneralizes, as one might say. It makes wrong predictions for the perfect, right? So we expect nist also to appear with the perfect tense, because the perfect is also the verbal noun, taka participle, but we do not see it. We have not turduk, he didn't come in the perfect, but not nis turduk. This alomorph also does not appear in pluperfect, so that's a big problem. Another objection to this analysis is the lack of any normal properties of past tense form in modern Ishkashimi, right? So you cannot use the form turd as a nominal in modern Ishkashimi, right? It is just a finite form. There are different forms for infinitive and past participles, but you cannot use the turd. Finally, a big objection to this is that we would expect asymmetric negation to surface in this context, right? Asymmetric negation is a term from Mati Miestamo 2005, where we have asymmetry between positive and negative forms, something you would see in Tamil, right? But if you look at the examples, I don't know, 1 and 2, example 1, with NIST, you don't see a different form popping up. You just see the normal or past tense form of the verb to go away. So there is no asymmetrical negation here. The negation is perfectly symmetrical. And it is a very valid criticism, as I think. The negative past tense form is the same as the positive one. So an important task is to explain how the past tense stands out. What is so special about the past tense? To be more specific, what are the differences between the past tense and the perfect tense, right? Because for me, at least for me, these are really, really close on some kind of conceptual scale. So it has been explored for other Pamirian languages, so I'll just like go through it. One important difference is evidentiality. As described in Nobertello 2023, the past tense is a witness form. Meanwhile, the perfect is used for non-witnessed events. And other contrasts are merativity, specific to the perfect, and resultsive meaning, which is also specific to the perfect. So with regard to evidentiality, Ishkashimi shows a very clear first-person effect in neutral contexts. If you remember this, in neutral context, it's impossible to generate a sentence in perfect with the first singular subject, right? Because perfect is a non-witness form, and you expect to witness the events that occur with yourself. A person normally witnesses the events they make. So without any context, out of the blue, the sentence 17, I did not go away at 4, is ungrammatical. But of course, you can imagine situations where you don't remember the things that you've done. So for example, I have just broken a glass. Where in which situations you can say things like this. For example, when you have not noticed breaking a glass, and then you look and see the pieces of glass lying on the floor, and you realize, oh, I have just broken a glass. The interpretation is not mine, is something that was given to me by a respondent. And in order to check this in spontaneous speech, in the narratives, I have recorded 2 narratives. One is about an ancient fortress Kovarkala being like on top of Rhin. This fortress is basically non-existent because some guy 50 years ago decided to break it. And another narrative is about a day in the life of the speaker. It was a story about like how did you spend the previous day. And as it can be expected, the first narrative features perfect verbs, like predominantly perfect verbs. Meanwhile, the second predominantly features past forms. So let's look here. They notified the locals by fire, so that it's kind of the story of how people used to communicate between the fortress and the Rhin, and the Kishlak Rhin. And you see the Dudukon form appearing here because that is something that the narrator did not witness. In the second example, you have the verb forms beloved and poved, because it is a story about the speaker. The speaker tells a story about themselves. And apart from evidentiality, there is also an experiential meaning of perfect. It's visible in the context such as I have never, where the past tense form is unavailable, the perfect being an only option. So for example, I have never bought dresses. Like all the respondents told me, you just say nachar naduk, and you don't use it with the past. The present is, the perfect is a lot more salient here. And just to pay respects to the work by Maxim Milenchenko, similar to Shugni, in Ishkashimi there's a small class of stative verbs, which trigger present stative interpretation when used in the perfect form. So basically you use them in the perfect form, but you refer to the present states. These are the verbs misuk, niduk, aluk, and pometsuk, right? So at least the same class as in Shugni, maybe there are more. I don't know it yet. So for example, I'm sitting on a chair right now would be azamakso pestuluk nilustuk, right? And not, you see the perfect form here, nilustuk. And like if you want to use it in the habitual context, you use the verb form nidam. I sit on this bench from time to time, and nidam is the present tense form. And another very prominent meaning of Ishkashimi perfect is mirativity, as like you remember from Shugni. And here the effect of sudden discovery is expressed by the verb form itself with no additional adverbs. So you see tet odamish shak veduk. Apparently you are a bad person. Right, so you don't really have any adverbs, and you get this mirative reading like from the unexpected use of the perfect form of the verb. So that's it for the differences. I have a bit more of them, but it's very basic. So here's an interesting puzzle with negation and preverbs, right? Ishkashimi has several prefixal verbs, and in a subset of these prefixal verbs, the negative marker can be put between the prefix and the stem. So we get something like negation, prefix, and stem, or prefix, negation, and stem. Pachalna 1959 notes 5 such verbs. Maybe there are more. Paradayuk, which means to sell. Paraferuk, to rinse. Fergirsuk, to go around, to wander. Ferbelgonuk, and basesuk. Most, but not all, of these prefixes stem from old Iranian preverbs, which in like most Iranian languages now, I think they are quite deeply attached to the verbs, but not in Ishkashimi. The first two verbs show a preverb para, which means front. So the etymologies are from Yusuf Bekov 2000 for Sanglichi. So paradayuk is a combination of the verb dayuk, which means to give, right? And para, which means front. The second verb is paraferuk, it means to rinse. So feruk is slurp, para is para. The next prefix fur is from Proto-Iranian fra, in front of. The verb furgersuk is derived from gersuk, the turn to wander. The verb furbulgonuk, to turn over, is derived from bulgonuk, to turn over. I don't know what is the semantics of fur here. And like most importantly, the verb bas isuk stems from the verb isuk, which is to go, right? Like this good old Iranian verb. And a loan word from Tajik, from a Tajik particle bas, which means enough. Well, I will ask the semanticists how the semantic shift occurred, like the verb to be able, which is derived from go, and like some particle which means stop. It's very interesting. The fieldwork, my fieldwork has shown that the negative markers may indeed precede or follow the prefix, right? It is not a remnant, which was like described 60 years ago. It is still an ongoing life part of the language, yielding the orders nek pref v and pref nek v. And this can be shown in the following contrast. So first, let's start with paradayuk, to sell. So you have azma usuki na paradayem. I do not sell this calf, right? So we have na paradayem, with para being between na and the verb. And similarly, you can say asma usuki para nadayem, with na intervening between the prefix and the verb. And the puzzling part is the prefix can even be used after the verb, as in 27. Asma usuki nadayem para, right? That's super cool. And interesting, these two orders may appear with both negative markers, with na and nist. So in the beginning, I told you that there is some asymmetry between na being a bound morpheme and nist being a clitic. But you see, in 28-29, we can do the same thing with nist. Azam mausuki nist paradut, right? Nist para dut. And in 29, you have azam mausuki para nist dut, right? We have two different orders here. However, younger speakers only use the order nek pref v. No, I think it's I'm always confused here. Just I will fix it right now. I think that they just say nis paradud. And I have a wrong example here. So there are some verbs that only allow for neg pref v. That means the preverbs cannot detach from the verb, right? So for example, a verb with the same preverb para faruk, right? We have the same preverb para faruk, but this preverb is kind of more closely attached to the verb. So we cannot say bibi, pushokoi para nisfurt, right? All the respondents told me nis para furt. So para furt is a kind of one verb, one lexical item here. The verb, there is a verb vergersuk, which means to wander around, to go around the place. It allows for two orders of preverb as negation. Au jike kishloke nist vergest, pechon nelust. So he did not go around the whole kishlak, and you see nist vergest and vernist gest. Yeah. And if you thought it was interesting, get ready for the next one. It is by suk. And I really like this verb. It's really remarkable. First, there is some alternation there's some variation in the present tense, because in the present tense, it's not basisuk, but it's mainly baisuk. And like in modern language, it's certainly baisuk in the present tense. And so I've seen bas is like one time in Pakhalin 1959, and I have not seen it in Yaroslavl corpus, and my speakers reject the form bas is. And the past tense has two allomorphs, right? The first allomorph is basugat. It's a suppletive allomorph. Let's go one step previously, and like isu, right, the verb to go has a suppletive form ogat in the past tense, right? So basically, I'm going would be like as isam, right? I have gone, I don't know, so something like this. In the past would be azam ogat, right? So one strategy to use bas isuk in the past tense is to have a suppletive form of the verb, the same as in proper isuk. But there is a second allomorph, which is a regularized form. It is bised, right? So you have the ba, you have the present stem is, and you attach ud, like having a regularized form of the past tense. And this allomorph is not attested in Pakhalin 1959. It is a newer development, and it is attested in newer texts. And there is indeed an asymmetry with regard to negation. So the first suppletive allomorph allows for both orders of neg and pref, right? Meanwhile, the second regular one only shows neg pref v. So let's look at 35. She could not sew skullcaps. Our sklo undervook basnes sohat, right? You see here basnes sohat. And in 36, it's our sklo undervook nis basohat, right? You have the suppletive form of the verb, right? Where we can detach the negation, we can detach the prefix and put it in another place. And let's look at the example 37, where we have bised, and the only option is to use niston bised. You cannot say ba nistesit. So it really shows you the process of grammaticalization going on before your eyes, right? So you have something like a combination of prefixal verb, of a prefix and the verb, which allows different orders with respect to negation, as in 35, 36. And you have a new kind of verb which like has ba deeply attached to isid. And in 37, you don't really see negation intervening between ba and isid. It's a new inseparable verb. So that's it for the negative preverbs. And I think that it's really something that you don't really see in other Iranian languages often. So the last thing is the negative particle noi, right? This particle is primarily described as negative answer no. That's how people talk, grammarians talk about it. Have you been here? No. I would call it like a prototypical context of noi. And you also see it in shugni, which is nai, and I don't know, this no nai can appear in sarikoli in very interesting context. But let's talk about Ishkashimi. It can be also a polarity ellipsis marker, right? You have this type of Seleucine elliptical constructions where we presented in 39. Jigtsuan trosknon noi, right? So you have everyone is scared of him, you not, if I was to translate, or you know, if I were to translate like word by word. And it surfaces in every elliptical context. I will not show the examples to you. So this noi may replace lexical verbs in any tense. It can replace the copula, right? So it's really this universal elliptical tool used in Ishkashimi. It's impossible to use nist in elliptical context. So, for example, if I were to elide the lexical verb in past tense and to keep the negation intact, I would not use nist. Let's look at the example 40. When for me, it's kind of natural to use nist if I was like constructing my own Ishkashimi language, but it's not permitted. So the non-elided structure is azamtucht, tit nistucht, right? So I would just drop the lexical verb and ask whether you can say azamtucht tit nist. But apparently you cannot say stuff like this. You need to say azamtucht tit noi. And a small detachment with the why not test explored in Zelstra 2004, it indicates that noi is a phrase as opposed to like na being a head, but it's not important now. However, there needs to be some evidence for actual elliptical structure, and I will guide you through that evidence. So alternatively, we may analyze now with the data we have these examples as just a negative answer, right? With no deletion going in the second clause, right? So if you look at the 40, I have this line over tugged. What if there is no structure here? And my data shows that it is indeed ellipsis. There are two main arguments for this one, this like small supporting argument. So for the first is the existence of personal clitics in the elliptical clause. And the second one is the clitics being dependent on the tense. The clitics not like rising unconditionally, but they being dependent on the tense. First argument is like this. In the past tense elliptical sentences, there's not only the subject of the clause and the negative particle noi, so not only t noi, but also a personal clitic, which is tit noi. And that really gives us a hint that there is some kind of structure. Either it's an auxiliary, right? If we treat it as auxiliary, or just a personal marker, depending on our analysis. But meanwhile, the lexical verb is elided. So you don't see the ellipsis of the whole clause, right? You still have some remnants being there. Jukun mubu orat tit noi, right? Everyone came here, you did not. It's something like you see in the English translation. If you look at the English translation, you see this did like supporting the not, and you cannot really say everyone came here, you not. It's I think it's a bit weird. So yeah, not the whole clause is elided. That's my point. Importantly, the presence of this clitic is not invariable, so it cannot appear in fragment answers. So you don't have to have the t in a fragment answer, right? You can just say t. So who came here? You, right? It's like in 43. So in some languages there is a phonological requirement to have that there are some weak pronouns and you need to switch to a strong pronoun. And apparently t is a strong pronoun by itself already. So you just say here t and not tit in 43. And the next argument for the presence of covert structure in some sentences, in such sentences, is the tense dependence of a clitic. In my view, it's even more elegant than the first. The example 42 shows a matrix clause in the past, right? As you remember, everyone came here, you did not. But the example 44, on the other hand, has a matrix clause with the present tense and no clitic. So you have here, everyone comes here, you do not. And here, in this example, you do not see the clitic because it depends on the tense of the matrix clause, and because like we can argue for the tense feature being in the elided clause as well, but we do not really see it. And what this example shows is the presence of some tense structure in both elided clauses, which sets apart examples 42 and 44. More specifically, there is T and phi in the clause. And another argument for actual ellipsis is the case matching that has been discussed a lot in the literature, so I'll not pay attention to it. So a constituent copies its case from the matrix clause. Мебо мактаб шедзарурват табо ной. Right, so you see тбо somehow getting the case, right? And if a constituent gets its case, we need to think about a syntactic head or maybe a functional mechanism how it gets its case. So that is the argument for it being some kind of elliptical structure. Okay, I think I надеюсь, что уложился во время и буду рад ответить на ваши вопросы.
Conclusion.
Conclusion. Well, just it's nothing out of the ordinary. So NIST and NA puzzle is still under investigation, and it crucially depends on the semantics of tenses, as I think. Negation interacts with preverbs in an interesting way. And also negative particle noi can show elliptical context. Also, what I have left out of the story is the way negative concord items are licensed, right? There is this very clear distinction between negative pronouns and non-negative pronouns, and I hope to investigate it as well. And also, basically, a Shugni type picture with modality going on, interaction of negation and modality. Yeah, that's all. Thank you for listening.